Hello students, welcome to biology class. In today's session, we are going to see about Unit 5 Human Physiology. In that unit, Chapter 18 Body Fluids and Circulation. Yes, Chapter 18 Body Fluids and Circulation we are going to see. In that chapter, the previous session, we discussed about the human circulatory system. The very important part in human circulatory system is heart. So, quick recap, we are going to see about the heart. Heart is the pumping organ. It pumps the blood throughout our body and to the lungs. So, here you can see the model of the heart. Heart is slightly tilted towards the left side, which is present in our thoracic cavity, which means between two lungs you can see the heart. So the size of the heart is clenched fist. If you close your finger, this is called as clenched fist. This is the size of the heart. Okay. So heart is very small organ but doing a very important function in our body. If we divide the heart into two equal halves, you can see the four important chambers inside it. Yes, heart has four chambers. So you can see the two upper chamber, the two small upper chambers are called as auricle, and two large and thick chamber is called as ventricle. Yes, the auricles are very small and thin when you compare with the ventricle. Ventricles are thick and large in size. On the right side, right auricle, right ventricle, and in the left side you will see left auricle, left ventricle. Okay. So in the right side, what kind of blood will comes and emit means, in the right side deoxygenated, the blood which rich in carbon dioxide will enter into the right side. Okay. From the right side, this blood will go to the lungs. In the left side, oxygenated blood receives from the lungs to auricle, and from the ventricle, the oxygenated blood from the left side moves throughout our body. Okay. This is about the four chambers and their role. In between the two chamber of right side, right auricle and right ventricle, you have one important valve which is called as tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve is present between the right auricle and right ventricle. And if you see the left side, left auricle, left ventricle, in between you will have bicuspid valve or mitral valve. Bicuspid valve or mitral valve which present in between the left auricle and left ventricle, which separates the auricle and ventricle. Then from the right ventricle, one vessel goes out. The right ventricle, the vessel which goes out is pulmonary artery. Inside the pulmonary artery, you have the valve called semilunar valve, also called as pulmonary valve. So the vessel which goes out from the right ventricle, that vessel is called as pulmonary artery, which carries the deoxygenated blood to lungs. So in that vessel you have a flap or valve which is called as semilunar valve or pulmonary valve. Same like that in left side, in left ventricle, one vessel, the vessel which comes out from left ventricle is aorta. Aorta, the largest vessel which comes out from the left ventricle. This aorta also have valve. That valve is also called as semilunar valve or aortic valve. Okay. So the pulmonary artery and the aorta, both valves are commonly called as semilunar valve. Or to differentiate, pulmonary artery we will use pulmonary valve, aorta we will use aortic valve. Both the way you can call, both are same. Okay. So four kinds of valves are there. The right hand side you will have tricuspid valve. The left hand side between the auricle and ventricle you will have a bicuspid valve, and between the right ventricle and pulmonary artery you will have semilunar valve or pulmonary valve. Between the left ventricle and the aorta you have one valve. That valve is called as semilunar valve, also called as aortic valve. So these are the four valves. And the next important concept what you learned in the previous section is SA node and AV node. SA node, abbreviation is sinoatrial node tissue. AVN node means arterial ventricular nodal tissue. This SAN and AVN play a vital role in cardiac cycle or heartbeat. Where present, SAN present in the right auricle and inside the wall of right side of right auricle, you can see the SAN node. AVN node is present in the right auricle only, but near to the auriculoventricular septa. Auriculoventricular septa, somewhat in this place you can see the AVN. So this SAN and AVN creates the contraction and relaxation in the heartbeat. Let us see in detail about how this process takes place in the heart. That process is called as cardiac cycle. So in today's session, first we are going to see about cardiac cycle. Cardiac cycle means how the heart pumps the blood, and the pumping blood will reach throughout our body and also to the lungs, and again how the blood come back to the heart. That is a cycle which is going to happen between the heart and body or heart and lungs. How it takes place by the help of SAN and AVN. Let us see about it in detail. So now we are going to see about how the cardiac cycle takes place. So to know it in better way, so first you should know the role of nodal tissue. In the previous section itself, you know about the nodal tissue. The SAN nodal tissue creates the electric impulse. That electric impulse is moved to AVN nodal tissue, followed by the auricle and ventricles are undergo some electrical impulse. Okay. Now, what is the role of nodal tissue? What is the role of nodal tissue in the beating of heart? Or how does the heart beat? Let us try to understand this concept in the topic of cardiac cycle. This cardiac cycle is a sequential work. It happens one after one in a sequence. So you should know about the sequence in the order how it takes place in the heart. So let us see about the heart function, and then we'll go through about what is cardiac cycle. So let us consider that heart is in relaxed state, completely relaxed. Both the auricle and ventricles are relaxed. That state is called as joint diastole. That state is called as joint diastole. So here you are learning one new word, joint diastole. Diastole means relaxation. Completely the heart is relaxed. No movement. It is relaxed phase. That relaxed phase is called as diastole. Okay. So first the joint diastole, that means whole heart, the auricle, both right side and left side auricle, and right side ventricle and left side ventricle, or both are in relaxed way. In that relaxed condition, what will happen? The auricle receives the blood. Both the auricles simultaneously they will get the blood. In the right side, it takes the deoxygenated blood via superior and inferior vena cava, and the left side it receives the oxygenated blood via pulmonary vein. So through this vessel, the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood gets emitted into the auricle during the joint diastole, during the relaxation phase. When the blood emit into the auricle, immediately in the right auricle, it start creating the SAN nodal tissue, start getting excited, and it start triggering the auricles to contract. I mentioned SAN is present. SAN nodal tissue is present in the right auricle. In the left corner of right auricle, you will have the SAN nodal tissue. The nodal tissue is a muscle and neural tissue. It is interconnected, which creates electrical impulse, electrical vibration inside the heart. So when the blood flow into the auricle, it creates that electrical impulse. Because of this electrical impulse, the auricle undergo contraction. It gets contract. Which part? Both the auricle, right auricle and left auricle gets contract. That process is called as arterial systole. Arterial systole. Again here you are learning the word systole. What is the meaning of systole? Means contraction. Here what is going to contract? Auricle part or the atrium part is going to contract. So such kind of contraction is called as atrial systole or auricle systole. So SAN creates the atrial systole. So first we saw joint diastole. Because of joint diastole, both the right and left auricle receiving the blood. After receiving the blood, it triggers the SAN, that is the sino-auricle nodal tissue gets excited, and it creates a contraction in both the side of auricle. Okay, because of this contraction, it creates the atrial systole, and this atrial systole, what it will do, it contracts the atrial part and it push the blood to ventricle. When it push the blood, that time both the walls, you know, in the right side you have tricuspid valve and left side you have bicuspid valve. Both the valve open and the blood flow from the auricle to ventricle. So due to the atrial systole, the blood flow from auricle to ventricle. Now the blood enter into the both the side of the ventricle. Right side and left side of the ventricle, the blood flows inside. Okay, because of atrial systole it happened. When the blood flows inside the ventricle, after the flowing, after the ventricle receives the blood, what will happen? The tricuspid and bicuspid valve close. It will get closed. Because of the flow of blood, it creates a ventricle muscular pressure. It creates the pressure in the ventricles. That is the reason the ventricles are thicker than auricle. Ventricles are thicker than atrium or auricle. Why means the blood is flow from auricle to ventricle. When it flow, it creates a pressure. That pressure should not damage the ventricle walls. To prevent that, the ventricle walls are thick and large. Okay. Now the blood enter into the right ventricle and left ventricle from the auricle. The SAN nodes trigger the AVN nodal tissue. This AVN nodal tissue, which present in the atrial ventricle septa, followed by this AVN nodal tissue, it divides into branches and form AVN bundle. This AVN bundle is spread throughout the ventricles, and this AVN bundles are connected to the ventricles into a fine fibers which is called as Purkinje fiber. So now what will happen when the blood move from auricle to ventricle with the high pressure, and along with this AVN nodal fiber triggering in the ventricles, it contracts the ventricle part. Okay, it contracts the ventricle part. The pressure is increasing, and this AVN nodal tissue which is connected to the both the side of ventricle helps to contract the ventricle region of the heart. When the contraction takes place in the ventricle region, what will happen? The semilunar valves open in both the side of pulmonary artery and the aorta. When the pulmonary artery and aorta, the semilunar valves open, what will happen? Due to the contraction of the ventricle, it pushes the blood outside the heart. So if you see in the right side, the right ventricle push the deoxygenated blood to lungs through pulmonary artery, and in the left side, the left ventricle push the oxygenated blood to throughout the body through aorta. So in that way, blood is moving from the heart to, if it is right side, it is moving to lungs. If it is left side, it is moving throughout our body. Simultaneously it will happen. Both the ventricle at a time it will contract and push the blood outside due to ventricular systole. Due to ventricular systole. So systole means contraction. Here what is going to contract? The ventricles, both the side, right and left ventricle is contracting. Due to that contraction, it pushed the blood or it pumped the blood outside. Now, after pumping, the ventricular pressure falls down. Due to the falls down, it closed the valves in the pulmonary artery and aorta. When the pressure falls down, automatically both the valves will get closed, and the bicuspid and tricuspid valves will open, and the relaxation phase will take place. That means it will go back to the joint diastole. So when pressure falls down, the ventricle also now relax. Auricle also relax and it move back to the joint diastole. So in the joint diastole what will happen? Again it will receive the blood and it form auricular systole. This auricular systole push the blood to ventricular, and in the ventricular again it creates a ventricular systole. Due to the ventricular systole it push the blood either to lungs or throughout our body. Again it will receive the joint systole. Like that the cycle will be formed in our body. That cycle is called as cardiac cycle. So let us see about what is the definition of cardiac cycle. Okay. So what is cardiac cycle? What is cardiac cycle? Cardiac cycle is a sequential event which is cyclically repeat in the heart. It's a sequential event which helps to cycle the blood throughout our body by the continuous heartbeat and pumping of the blood. By continuous heartbeat and pumping of the blood, it is happen in our body. So what is cardiac cycle means? Sequential event which is cyclically repeated in the heart. So what is cyclically happen in the heart means systole and diastole. Systole and diastole which takes place in auricle and ventricle helps to contract and relax the heart. Because of the contraction and relaxation, heart is beating and pumping the blood throughout our body. So this is about the cardiac cycle. Quick recap about the cardiac cycle. In the sequential order, first sequential is joint diastole. Joint diastole followed by you will have auricle systole. This auricle systole is formed by the SAN nodal tissue. This SAN nodal tissue creates the auricle systole in the right auricle and left auricle. In that way the auricle contract and push the blood to ventricle. When the blood reach the ventricle, now in the right ventricle and left ventricle, it creates a ventricular systole. This ventricular systole is created by AVN nodal tissue. This AVN nodal tissue, bundle of hairs and Purkinje's, this all connected to the ventricles and it contract the ventricle or it forms a ventricular systole. Because of the ventricular systole, the blood moves out of the heart. So after the blood moves out, the both auricle and ventricle gets relaxed. Both will go to the diastole, that is called as joint diastole. Again the sequential order will be repeated in cardiac cycle. So this is about the cardiac cycle, the very important process and interesting process which takes place in our body. Let us see about the cardiac output. How much amount of blood is going out. How much time is taking for a movement of this cycle inside the heart. Let us see in detail. So the next topic is cardiac output. What is cardiac output? The total volume of the blood pumped out by each ventricle per minute is called as cardiac output. Yes, the ventricle is going to push the blood out. The right ventricle push the blood into lungs. The left ventricle push the blood throughout our body. When it pushes the blood out, how much total volume of blood is pushed out? If you see in the cardiac cycle, that means you all know the heartbeat, it takes 72 times per minute. The normal human being, the average heartbeat is 72 times per minute. Okay, so that is 72 cardiac cycle. 72 times in 1 minute means 72 cardiac cycle takes place in 1 minute. What is the value of one cycle? What is the time period of one cycle means? If 72 cycle is equal to 1 minute. If you convert this 1 minute to seconds, you will get 60 seconds. If you want to calculate for one cycle, you have to divide 60 by 72. If you divide 60 by 72, you will get 0.8 second. So for one circulation of blood in the heart, it takes lesser than a second in time. That lesser than second means 0.8 second only it is taking for one cardiac cycle. This contraction and relaxation, it takes place 0.8 second. You can see that how much very limited time period it is taking to make one cycle. So the one cycle of cardiac is 0.8 second. Now we are going to see how much blood is pumped out by the ventricle for 1 minute. How we can calculate means, for normal, for one cycle, the 0.8 second for one cycle, the ventricle pumps out 70 ml of blood. 70 ml of blood is pumped out by the ventricle, both the side, right side and left side. The ventricle pumps 70 ml of blood. That volume of blood is called as stroke volume. That volume of blood is called as stroke volume. Okay, to calculate the cardiac output, what you have to do means, 72 cardiac cycle takes place for 1 minute. Okay, the 72 into 70 ml of blood, if you multiply, you will get around 5040 ml of blood is moved out during 1 minute. Duration of the time is for 1 minute. How much ml of blood is coming out means around 5040 ml of blood is coming out. Let us see about the cardiac cycle help of video.
Our heart is an important component of cardiovascular system. It creates pressure every time it beats. This pressure moves the blood to every cell in our body. Now let us see what is cardiac cycle. The sequence of events in a single heartbeat is known as cardiac cycle. This cycle involves the systole or contraction and diastole or relaxation of atria and ventricles. Look at this figure. In this, you can make out that all the four chambers of heart are in relaxed stage, that is, joint diastole stage. Now you will observe here that bicuspid and the tricuspid valves are open. So what will happen? The blood will flow from the pulmonary vein and vena cava to left and right atrium respectively. Right? Now, the arterial systole is initiated when SA node sends out an electric signal. During arterial systole, the atria undergoes a continuous contraction which forcefully passes the blood into the ventricles through tricuspid and the bicuspid valves. Ventricular systole begins when ventricles are filled with blood. The AV node, as shown here, picks up the signal and then conducts it throughout the ventricles. This stimulates the ventricular contraction, and as the ventricular contraction increases, the ventricular pressure causes the closure of AV valves. Now, this continuous contraction causes the further increase in ventricular pressure. What will happen because of this? It will open the semilunar valves and the blood flows into the pulmonary artery and the aorta.
So next we are going to see about measurement of blood pressure. Measurement of blood pressure. This blood pressure also indicated as BP. Okay, BP means blood pressure.
Blood pressure. The force exerted by the blood on the wall of a blood vessel is called the blood pressure.
How we can measure the blood pressure? We can measure the blood pressure by using the instrument sphygmomanometer. Sphygmomanometer is the instrument used to measure the blood pressure. So what is the principle used in measuring the blood pressure means?
This pressure is greater in the arteries than the veins. The pressure in the artery during ventricular contraction is called the systolic pressure, and the pressure in the artery during ventricular relaxation is called diastolic pressure.
The sphygmomanometer find out the ratio of systolic pressure and diastolic pressure. Yes, it gives a ratio of systolic pressure to diastolic pressure. What is systolic pressure? When the ventricle contract or the ventricle is under the systole, what will happen? It will create a pressure. That pressure is called as systolic pressure. And when the ventricle is relaxed or in diastole time of ventricular, the ventricle is completely relaxed. That time is called as diastolic pressure. When you measure the ratio of the systolic pressure and diastolic pressure by using the instrument of sphygmomanometer, the average blood pressure of the healthy adult is 120 per 80 mm of Hg. This 120 indicate the systolic pressure and the 80 mm of Hg indicates the diastolic pressure. That means in the ventricle systole or ventricle contraction, the blood comes out in high pressure. That time the normal range is 120 mm of Hg. When the ventricle is relaxed, when that time the blood moves inside our body, that pressure is 80 mm of Hg. Here Hg means mercury. Mercury is used in the measuring unit in the sphygmomanometer. How they will use this sphygmomanometer to find out the blood pressure? Let us see. You can see in this instrument the rubber tube is connected to one end is connected to the measuring unit and another end you will have a cloth along with that one vacuum pump is attached. This cloth is tied up in the upper arm of our hand. In the hand, in the upper arm, that cloth will be tied up and this vacuum pump is used to extract the air which present inside that cloth. So when it extracts the air, it creates the pressure in our skin, in our body. So when it creates the pressure, what will happen? The blood flow inside the vessels also extract the pressure. So the extracting of that pressure will be noted as a systolic pressure. After some time, they will completely relax that pump. Relax and they'll maintain a normal phase. In that time, they'll measure the value. That value is called as diastolic pressure. So the systolic pressure and diastolic pressure helps to maintain the blood pressure in our body. By maintaining this blood pressure, it's very important. If blood pressure, that systolic pressure and diastolic pressure is going high, means it leads to hypertension or high BP. If the value is going too down, it leads to hypotension or low BP. Low BP and high BP both are not good for our health. It should be the average value, that is 120 to 80 mm of Hg is the normal average value. That value should be maintained in our body. It's very important. Okay. So in the measurement of blood pressure, what is the average blood pressure value? 120 by 80 mm of Hg. In this, any up and down which leads to hypertension or hypotension in our body. So this is about the sphygmomanometer. So next we are going to see about the important instrument which is stethoscope. Often if you go and visit the physician or doctor, you can see this stethoscope. So this stethoscope is very important to monitor the sound of the heart. Why we want to monitor the sound of the heart? Let us see. So what is the instrument name means? As I mentioned, it is a stethoscope. You will have the earring piece. These are the two earring piece which is used to keep in our ear. Okay. And the long connecting tube is there. This connecting tube is connected to the chest piece. This is called as chest piece, where you have the diaphragm. This diaphragm amplifies the sound of the heart. It amplifies the sound of the heart and you can hear the sound of heart. Okay. You all know the sound of the heart. Lop tap, lop tap. You can also listen now. So this is the sound of the heart. So we can hear the sound of the heart. So this lop tap, behind this also some scientific things are going out. What is the thing in lop sound means? The lop sound is formed by the closure of bicuspid and tricuspid valve. Yes, when the bicuspid and tricuspid valve close, you will hear lop sound. When the semilunar valve closure takes place, that time you will get dub sound. So lop sound due to the closure of tricuspid and bicuspid valve. Dub sound is due to the closure of semilunar valve. So two kind of sound you will hear in the cardiac cycle. These two sounds are very prominent. So why we want to hear this sound? What is the use? Why means this sound, luptop sound, is very important for the cardiac cycle, whether it happen in a proper way. If the doctor is measuring the heartbeat sound, that time some murmuring sound sometime it will produce. If you have some heart problem or you will infected with some infectious agent, that time what will happen? The heart will produce a murmuring sound, that it will not create luptop sound. It will be a very murmuring sound will be produced. That murmuring sound indicate some problem in our body. Okay. So this is the reason of listening the sound of the heart. Now how they will use? They will use this earpiece. This earpiece will be kept in the ear, and this chest piece should be placed slightly towards your left side, because heart is present slightly towards the left side. When you keep this diaphragm amplifies the sound of the heartbeat, and you can keenly listen the lup-tup, lup-tup, lup-tup. The sound can be keenly you can listen by using this amplifier diaphragm. So by hearing that sound, the doctor can predict whether the heart is functioning properly, whether the valves are functioning properly. If murmuring sound is coming, means some problem is there in the heart. Hope you all understood today's session. Today's session is more informative, and you learned about how the heart pumping the blood and how the heartbeat takes place in our body, and the various instrument which is used to measure the blood pressure, sound of the heart. So these all the instrument help to detect the functioning of the heart. So this is very important part. Learn properly and do your worksheet properly. Thank you for watching this video.